An older CEO was abandoned on a date, then a single dad asked one question. The waiter refilled her glass for the third time, and still the chair across from her stayed empty. Diane Whitfield sat alone at a window table 60 floors above the city in a black dress she had chosen with more care than she'd admit to anyone, while the man who invited her to dinner had simply stopped answering his phone 40 minutes ago. She was 54 years old. She ran a company with 1,100 employees. She had negotiated million-dollar contracts without her voice ever shaking. And yet in this moment, under the golden restaurant lights, she felt smaller than she had felt in 20 years. If you believe kindness can still find us in our most humiliating moments, hit like, drop a comment, share this with someone who needs it, and subscribe to Kindness Corner, too, because what happens next might just restore your faith in people. Diane had built Whitfield Logistics from a single lease truck into a company that moved freight across 4 states. She'd done it after her divorce, after the lawyers took what they could and left her with a business plan and a stubborn refusal to fail twice in one lifetime. She was proud of what she'd built, but pride doesn't keep you warm on a Tuesday night when your son is grown and gone, when your friends are all paired off, and when a dating app matched you with a man named Gregory who seemed, over 3 weeks of texting, kind enough, funny enough, real enough to give a chance to. He wasn't real at all. Somewhere between the appetizer and the second glass of wine, Diane had begun to understand that. His replies had gotten shorter, then they stopped. She kept checking her phone with the practiced calm of a woman who had chaired 100 board meetings, refusing to let her face show what her chest already knew. The restaurant swirled around her. A table of laughing colleagues to her left, a young couple leaning into each other by the window, a waiter gliding past with a tray of champagne for someone's anniversary. Everyone in the room seemed to belong to someone. Diane belonged to an empty chair and a cooling plate of food she no longer had any appetite for. She thought about leaving. She thought about it for nearly 10 minutes, running the math the way she ran every difficult decision. Was it worse to sit here a while longer or to stand up and let the whole restaurant watch a woman leave alone in her best dress? In the end, dignity kept her seated a moment too long, and that single moment changed everything. That was when Daniel Reyes walked past her table carrying his daughter fast asleep against his shoulder. He was 38, a widower, a single father of a 7-year-old named Mia, and he had brought her to this restaurant only because it was her birthday and he had promised her 6 months ago, before her mother's condition worsened, before the funeral, before his whole life folded in on itself, that when she turned 7, they'd eat somewhere with a view of the whole city. He had kept that promise, even though it nearly broke him to walk in the door alone with a little girl in a paper crown, even though every part of him wanted to cancel and stay home under a blanket instead. He kept it because some promises are the last threads holding a person together, and Daniel Reyes was a man who did not let go of threads. He noticed Diane the way you notice someone trying very hard not to be noticed. Her hands were folded too neatly. Her spine was too straight. Her eyes kept drifting to the door and then away from it fast, like she was embarrassed to have looked at all. He almost walked past. He told himself it wasn't his business. He had enough sorrow of his own to carry without picking up a stranger's. But Mia stirred against his shoulder, murmured something about the lights, and in that small motion, Daniel found himself slowing down beside Diane's table instead of walking on. He didn't say, "Are you okay?" He didn't say, "Were you stood up?" He asked one simple question, quiet enough, clear's throat, that only she could hear it. "Would it be all right if my daughter and I kept you company for a few minutes? She's convinced tonight is magic, and I think she might be right." Diane looked up at him, at the tired kindness in his face, at the sleeping child in the paper crown, at a stranger who had somehow noticed her pain without naming it, and offered her an exit that cost her nothing. For a moment, she couldn't answer. She had spent her whole adult life being the one who rescued other people, employees, her son, herself, and she had forgotten what it felt like to be handed a small mercy by someone who expected nothing in return. She said, "Yes." Daniel sat Mia gently into the chair across from Diane, and the little girl woke just enough to blink at the stranger and ask, in the unfiltered way of children, whether Diane was a princess because her dress was black like the night sky and she had sparkly earrings like stars. Diane laughed, a real laugh, the first one in weeks, and told Mia that she supposed she was a very tired princess who'd had a long day at her castle, which was really just a big office building downtown. Mia found this endlessly funny. Daniel found himself smiling for the first time since the funeral, watching his daughter chatter with a woman she'd known for 90 seconds like they were old friends. They ended up sharing the table. Daniel apologized, half joking, that he hoped he wasn't intruding on someone's plans, and Diane, surprising herself, told him the truth. She told him she'd been waiting for a date who wasn't coming, that she felt foolish sitting there in her nice dress with a full glass of wine and an empty chair, that she'd almost left before he walked by. Daniel didn't offer pity, which she was grateful for. He simply said that the man was a fool, said it plainly, the way you'd state a fact about the weather. And then he changed the subject to ask what kind of work let a woman command a restaurant table with such quiet authority even when she was alone. She told him about the trucking company. He told her about being a contractor, about losing his wife to cancer 8 months earlier, about learning to braid his daughter's hair from shaky online videos at midnight because there was no one left to ask. He said it without asking for sympathy, the way people do when grief has become simply a fact of their days rather than a fresh wound they're still bleeding from. Diane found herself listening in a way she hadn't listened to anyone in years, not performing patience, not waiting for her turn to speak, just listening because something in this strange man's honesty had cracked open a door in her she'd kept locked since her divorce. Mia fell back asleep against a folded napkin somewhere around dessert, and Daniel and Diane kept talking long after the plates were cleared, long after the couple by the window had paid their bill and left, long after the restaurant had begun to empty into the cold bright night beyond the glass. They talked about the specific loneliness of success, how you can fill your calendar with meetings and still come home to silence, how people assume that a corner office means you've got life figured out when really you just figured out how to hide the parts that aren't. Daniel talked about the terror of raising a daughter alone, of being both mother and father, of some mornings not knowing how he'd get out of bed and doing it anyway because a small girl needed her hair braided and her lunch packed and someone to believe every single day that things would be okay. Diane realized somewhere around midnight that she had stopped checking her phone. She realized she hadn't thought about Gregory in over an hour. She realized that the ache in her chest from being abandoned had quietly transformed into something else entirely, a fullness, a warmth, the strange grace of being seen by someone who had absolutely nothing to gain from seeing her. Before they left, Daniel asked for her number, not smoothly, not like a man running a line, but like someone a little out of practice and a little afraid of being turned down. Diane gave it to him without hesitation, something she would not have believed herself capable of 3 hours earlier. As they walked toward the elevator together, Mia woke just long enough to reach for Diane's hand, and Diane, who had spent years being the strongest person in every room she entered, felt her eyes fill with tears she didn't bother hiding anymore. In the weeks that followed, what began as an accidental kindness became something neither of them had expected. Daniel called, not with grand gestures, but with small, steady ones. A check-in after a hard day, a photo of Mia's newest drawing, a simple thinking of you. Diane found herself rearranging her schedule around coffee before board meetings, something the old version of her would have called reckless and the new version of her called the first wise decision she'd made in years. She met Mia again, this time properly, at a park on a Saturday, and spent 2 hours being taught the correct way to push a swing by a 7-year-old who took the responsibility very seriously. It wasn't a fairy tale arriving all at once. There were hard days, too. Daniel's grief still ambushed him without warning. Some nights he called Diane just to sit in silence on the phone because he couldn't find words for the missing. Diane had her own walls, built brick by brick over a marriage that ended in betrayal, and she didn't lower them easily or all at once. But Daniel never asked her to. He simply kept showing up, kept asking questions instead of making demands, kept choosing patience over pressure, and slowly, the way trust always builds, not in leaps, but in small repeated proofs, Diane let him in. 6 months after that night in the restaurant, Diane stood in her kitchen watching Daniel help Mia frost cupcakes for a school project, flour dusted across his forearms, Mia narrating the entire process with the seriousness of a surgeon. Diane realized she was smiling without meaning to, the way you smile when your whole chest feels warm and you can't quite remember the last time it felt this way. She thought about that night at the restaurant, about how close she'd come to leaving before Daniel ever walked past, about how one small act of unasked for kindness had rerouted the entire rest of her life. She thought about how the worst moment of her evening, being abandoned, humiliated, sitting alone under those golden lights, had actually been the moment everything good began. She understood something then that she tried later to put into words for anyone who would listen, that the people who show up for you aren't always the ones you expected, and the nights that break your heart aren't always the ones that end it. Sometimes the person who rescues you isn't chasing anything from you at all. Sometimes he's just a tired father carrying his sleeping daughter past your table, noticing your pain without naming it, and choosing, in a world that so often teaches us to look away, to stop and ask one simple, generous question instead. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you that kindness still finds its way to the people who need it most, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment about the part that moved you. Share it with someone who might need this story tonight, and subscribe to Kindness Corner, too, so you never miss the next one. Before we go, we have one small request. If you have ever been the stranger who received an unexpected kindness or the one who offered it, we would love for you to type the word kindness in the comments below so we can see just how many hearts this story has touched tonight. Diane Whitfield never did find out what happened to the man who left her waiting that night, and in time she stopped wondering. She had, after all, found something far better than an apology. She had found a family she never knew she was missing, built not from grand romantic gestures, but from one quiet question asked by a stranger who simply chose to care. And perhaps that is the truest kind of love story there is, not the one that begins with fireworks, but the one that begins with someone noticing you when the whole rest of the world had simply walked by.